Daniel Carter pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped into the mansion earlier than usual. The polished marble floor reflected the last gold of the sunset, and the faint scent of lavender still clung to the air. He was about to call out when a faint metallic clink reached him. It came from the kitchen, a strange scraping sound that made him pause. He walked silently down the hallway. As he neared the half-open door of the kitchen, the scene inside rooted him to the spot. In the far corner of the spacious, immaculate kitchen, a small figure was crouched on the tiled floor. Maya, the little girl he had adopted 3 years ago from a Detroit orphanage, was bent over a stainless steel dog bowl, her thin hands gripping the edges as she scooped dry food into her mouth. Her braids hung over her tear-streaked face. She didn't even lift her head when the door creaked slightly. The same bowl belonged to Max, the golden retriever that had died last year. For a moment, the house became silent in a way he had never experienced before. Daniel stood frozen, every sound dimming, his pulse pounding in his ears. The weight of the moment sank into him like ice water. 30 endless seconds passed before he could even process what he was seeing. Then he heard Isabel's voice, sharp and commanding. "Finish that, you disgusting little liar," Isabel said coldly from somewhere just out of view. "That's the dinner you get when you lie." Daniel's throat went dry. Maya tried to answer, but her voice was barely audible, trembling. "I'm sorry." "Sorry won't help you," Isabel said. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before calling your father to complain that I didn't feed you." Daniel's heart stopped. 2 hours earlier, there had been a quiet call from Maya. Her voice on the phone had been so soft, almost playful, saying she hadn't had lunch again. He had laughed gently, believing it was just childish exaggeration. He had promised pizza for dinner. Now, standing in the doorway, that small voice echoed in his mind like a judgment. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Isabel's tone turned almost sweet. "Go on, finish it. Then tell your father how happy you are here." And then came the whisper that shattered him completely. "Yes, Mommy Isabel, we are a happy family." Her words cracked halfway through. They sounded like a practiced line, as if she had learned that survival depended on lying. Daniel took one step back from the doorway, too stunned to breathe. For 3 years, he had been away building new markets, closing deals, believing that Isabel loved Maya like her own. He had accepted the perfect family pictures, the staged smiles at rare dinners, the flawless school reports that spoke of discipline and adaptation. But now, through the crack of a door, the entire illusion collapsed. As he backed away silently down the hall, he heard Isabel's last words, sharp like a knife. "You know what happens to children who lie, don't you?" Maya's small voice, broken and soft, answered, "Yes, Mommy." Daniel turned, gripping the handrail to steady himself as he climbed the stairs. The rhythm of his heart was chaotic, and his mind was reeling. In his study, he closed the door and locked it. For long minutes he sat in the dark, hands pressed to his face. He thought of the years he had spent thinking that money and structure could heal every wound. He thought of his own childhood as the only black boy in a prestigious Connecticut prep school, of the slights, the whispered jokes, the deliberate loneliness. He had brought Maya into his home to protect her from the world, only to hand her to an enemy wearing the mask of a perfect wife. A vow began to form in the stillness of that room, slow and deliberate. He would not scream. He would not rush into that kitchen. He would plan. Because some battles are not won with shouting. They are won by patience, by letting the enemy believe they are safe. That night, Daniel lay awake, listening to the house breathe, every sound now different, sharper. The image of Maya by the bowl stayed with him, as if burned into his vision, and he knew that nothing in this house would ever be the same again. For hours after that moment in the kitchen, Daniel stayed alone in his study, staring at the black window. He could still hear the scrape of dry dog food in that metal bowl, the sound of a child swallowing without chewing, the way she whispered just to survive. His mind replayed the phone call from earlier in the day. He had answered on speaker, distracted by a contract document. Maya's voice had been barely above a whisper when she said, "Daddy, I'm hungry. I think Isabel forgot my lunch again." He had laughed, leaning back in his chair. "We'll get pizza tonight, all right? Just a few more hours, champ." She had said thank you in that same quiet tone, and now, remembering, the lightness in his voice on that call felt like a betrayal. Daniel leaned forward and opened his laptop. Photos began to fill the screen, the ones Isabel posted so proudly. Every picture was arranged perfectly. Isabel centered, smiling, the girl often blurred in the background or half hidden, her smile tight and cautious. As he clicked through the years, he noticed details he had never truly seen. School reports marked with phrases like, "often arrives late and appears tired." Isabel had always brushed them away with a gentle tone. "You know her background, Daniel. She needs discipline, structure. I'm firm because I love her." He remembered the way she would place a hand on his arm as she said it, the touch rehearsed, soothing. He remembered how he had nodded, thinking he was leaving Maya in good hands. The truth now was like acid. He closed the laptop and went to a locked drawer in his desk. Inside was a small device that looked like a phone charger. He held it for a moment. Years of building a business had taught him that information was the sharpest weapon. That night, when Isabel finally came upstairs, Daniel pretended to be asleep. Only when her breathing had evened out did he rise. Moving like a shadow through the house, he began placing tiny recorders behind bookshelves, beneath counters, in corners of rooms. Every step, every placement, came with the same thought: I will know the truth, all of it. Just past midnight, as he slid a recorder behind a framed photograph in the hallway, he heard voices. He followed the faint sound until he reached the living room. Isabel was on speakerphone, her tone light and casual. "She's completely under control," Isabel said, her voice calm. "Daniel almost never notices anything, and when he does, she knows what to say to keep him happy. It's all training." A woman's voice, hesitant and tinny through the phone, answered, "Isabel, don't you think you're going too far? She's only a child." Daniel's hand gripped the doorframe. "You saw what those kids were like in that orphanage," Isabel replied. "Wild, without any manners. Someone has to teach her. Daniel's too soft to do what needs to be done. He wants to be the hero. I see reality." The other voice murmured something, but Isabel spoke over it. "And besides," she said with a low laugh, "she's useful. He loves the idea of saving a black child. Makes him feel noble, and while he's busy with that, I get help around the house." The laugh that followed was sharp and cold. Daniel had to press himself against the wall to keep from falling. He stayed there, hidden, until the call ended. Then he went back to his study, closed the door, and listened to the silence. His chest felt heavy, but his mind was clearer than it had been in years. By morning, the house looked the same, but nothing was the same. At breakfast, Isabel poured herself coffee and said lightly, "You're up early today, darling. That's a rare sight." Daniel only nodded. His voice, when it came, was steady. "Busy day ahead." She smiled, unaware that the ground beneath her feet had already begun to crack. For the next several days, Daniel lived two separate lives. To Isabel, he was the same husband she had always known, quiet, busy, distracted by meetings. To Maya, he tried to be invisible, careful not to startle her, waiting for the moment when she would finally realize he was watching everything. While the house played its perfect role during the day, Daniel spent each night in his study, headphones over his ears, listening to the recordings. At first, it was just small things. Isabel ordering Maya to scrub the kitchen floor because a glass had been misplaced. Isabel calling her lazy, ungrateful. Then, one afternoon, a sharper sound came through the speakers, a door slamming and Maya's sobs echoing in a confined space. Through the recording, Daniel heard Isabel saying with unshaken calm, "Stay down there in the basement until you learn to keep your hands to yourself. Maybe the dark will teach you manners." The sobbing continued for what felt like forever. Daniel closed his eyes as he listened, his hands tightening around the chair's armrests. That night, he walked to the basement door when the house was silent. It was spotless, as if nothing had happened. He stood there for a long time, touching the cold handle, imagining a small girl trapped behind it. Another recording captured Isabel, speaking on the phone again. She said, "It's actually working. She barely makes a sound anymore. I don't even have to raise my voice much. She just knows." The other voice asked, "Aren't you worried Daniel will find out?" "Daniel?" Isabel answered with a dismissive laugh. "He lives in a world of numbers and contracts. He doesn't even notice what color shirt he wears. He trusts me because I make him feel like he chose the right woman. He will never see what happens when he's gone." Listening to that, Daniel understood that he had been made into a fool in his own house. Every word, every laugh, every command from Isabel became another piece of evidence, another cut into what used to be his trust. On the fourth night of listening, he heard something that nearly made him tear the headphones off. Maya's voice, trembling, said, "Please, can I eat something before cleaning?" Isabel's voice came in sharp. "You don't ask. You do what I tell you. Finish cleaning, and if there's time, maybe I'll think about it." The sound of a slap echoed. Maya whimpered, barely audible. Daniel pulled the headphones off and pressed the palms of his hands into his eyes. The following morning, he sat in the dining room before anyone else was awake. The housekeeper placed a cup of coffee in front of him, glancing nervously at his expression. When Isabel finally came down, still adjusting the silk robe around her shoulders, she said lightly, "You're awake again before me, 2 days in a row. That must be a new habit." Daniel looked at her across the table, his face calm. "Something like that." She poured her coffee, adding milk in small circles. "Maybe you're finally realizing that life isn't all work," she said with a laugh. But Daniel said nothing more. Upstairs, he opened a locked drawer once again and began creating a timeline, an almost clinical record of everything he had discovered. Dates, times, files. The recordings were not just whispers anymore. They had become a map of the secret life that had been hidden from him. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills and Isabel hummed somewhere in the house, Daniel sat back in his chair, looking at the careful rows of evidence. He whispered to himself, low enough for no one to hear, "She doesn't know it yet, but this is going to end." On the fifth morning, Daniel rose before dawn. The house was still, and the sky outside the tall windows was a shade of pale gray. He walked to the kitchen, rolled up the sleeves of his shirt and began to cook. It had been years since he had touched a skillet, but his hands moved with a certainty that came from childhood memories rather than practice. The smell of butter and sweet batter began to fill the air. He had barely placed the first stack of pancakes on the table when soft footsteps approached. Maya stopped in the doorway. Her school uniform was already on, and she held her backpack tightly against her chest. Daniel looked up and smiled at her. "Come sit," he said quietly, his voice careful, as though the slightest wrong tone could make her flee. She hesitated, glancing back toward the hallway, but finally stepped into the room. He served a generous portion of pancakes on a plate and set it in front of her. "You need food to grow strong," he said, keeping his tone gentle. Her hands hovered over the fork, uncertain. A moment later, Isabel entered, perfectly put together, though her expression tightened when she saw the table. She forced a laugh. "What a surprise," she said as she moved toward the counter. "You decided to make breakfast for us." Daniel replied, "I thought I'd try something different." Maya's eyes darted from him to Isabel, reading the air. Isabel sat down, still smiling, though there was an edge to it. "Careful, darling," she said, lifting her coffee cup. "Don't spoil her. Children can take advantage when you're too soft." Daniel's gaze shifted to Isabel and stayed there, steady. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "people take advantage of kindness in ways that nobody can imagine. But there's always a moment when accounts are settled." The words were calm, but there was something in them that made Isabel's smile falter for the briefest second. She recovered quickly, saying with an airy laugh, "Well, I suppose that's true. Everyone learns eventually." Maya had frozen, fork in hand, staring at her plate. She did not understand the layers in his words, but Isabel did. That evening, Daniel came home earlier than usual. He asked about dinner, suggested a walk after, and for the rest of the night behaved as if the morning's exchange had been forgotten. Isabel, seeing this, relaxed. But for Maya, something had changed. For the first time in years, someone had put food in front of her with no conditions. Over the next days, Daniel continued this quiet change. He was home before sunset, reading documents in the living room rather than locking himself in the study. He invited both of them to have dinner together. Sometimes he asked Maya how her day had been, and though her answers were short, she slowly began to look at him instead of the floor. Isabel, observing, said one night, "You've been so thoughtful lately. It's almost romantic. Did something happen at work?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I just realized there are things I want to pay more attention to." She tilted her head. "I like this side of you," she said, with a playful tone. He answered, "I'm glad you do." What Isabel didn't know was that each gesture of kindness, each evening spent at home, was another piece of a plan. While she believed she was regaining control, Daniel was studying her, documenting her, and laying the final stones of something she had no idea was already underway. Maya, still cautious, began to eat more during breakfast. Sometimes, when Isabel was out of the room, she looked at him as if trying to measure whether it was safe to trust him. For Daniel, every one of those glances was a promise that the day was coming when she would never have to look over her shoulder again. The days that followed became a stage Daniel carefully arranged. Isabel thought she was watching him soften with guilt for all his past absences, but every moment was deliberate. He began inviting her to dinner at quiet restaurants, the kind she liked because people could see her. On the surface, he was attentive, asking about her friends, listening to her stories about the club she frequented. Behind that calm face, he was counting gestures, expressions, learning exactly when her guard dropped. At home, his routine changed completely. He asked for evenings together, suggested board games, and even proposed a weekend trip. Isabel told her friends over the phone one afternoon, her voice giddy as she said, "Daniel has been so sweet lately. It's like he finally understands how much I do for this family. I think he feels guilty for traveling so much." Daniel listened to that call through the recording app and made a note. The trip he suggested was to Disneyland. Isabel resisted at first, saying the park was too overwhelming for a child who needed structure, but Daniel insisted. "I want to make some memories," he said, keeping his voice warm. "That's all." On the morning of the trip, Maya sat in the back seat of the car, hands folded tightly, almost trying to disappear. Daniel kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror. He asked gently, "Maya, do you like roller coasters?" She looked up quickly, startled, and whispered, "I don't know. I've never been on one." "We'll find out together," Daniel said, keeping his tone calm, not forcing a smile. The park was loud, full of music and color. Maya's small steps quickened slightly when she saw the rides, but every time she looked at Isabel, her pace slowed again. They went on their first ride together, a gentle, spinning carousel. When the music started and the horses began to move, Daniel saw the corners of Maya's mouth lift just a little. Throughout the day, he paid close attention to every detail. When a vendor offered her cotton candy, Maya shook her head. She said softly, "Mommy Isabel said I can't have junk food." Daniel crouched to meet her eyes and said, "For today you can have some. It's just a treat." She looked at him, searching his face, but when her gaze flicked to Isabel standing behind them, she pulled back her hand and said, "No, thank you." It was a reflex that spoke louder than any recording. As the day went on, Isabel spent most of her time taking photos of herself, adjusting her hair, posting images on social media. Daniel noticed how, in every photo, she positioned herself perfectly while Maya appeared blurred or half-hidden. Later, while she was busy writing captions on her phone, Daniel won a large stuffed bear at one of the stands. He handed it to Maya. She hugged it so tightly that for a moment she forgot to look at Isabel for approval. That moment, brief as it was, gave him hope. By evening, they had taken dozens of pictures. Isabel uploaded one of them with a caption, "Beautiful day at Disneyland. Being a mother is the greatest blessing of my life." The comments began flooding in, praising her for her dedication and perfect family. That night, when they returned home and Isabel went to bed early, Daniel sat at his desk, scrolling through every photo and caption she had posted that day. He took screenshots of them all, each one a piece of the illusion she had built around herself. Looking at the smiling faces on the screen, he whispered, "Every mask falls, eventually." Back from the trip, Daniel worked faster. Every hour that Isabel spent at the spa, at lunches with friends, or planning photo sessions for social media became an opportunity. His laptop was full of files, audio recordings, video clips, photographs, and now screenshots of her own carefully curated posts. The illusion she had crafted so perfectly was becoming her own undoing. 2 days later, he made a call. In the quiet of his private office downtown, Daniel spoke to someone he had trusted for 15 years. "Lawrence, I need you to come. It's urgent," he said. Lawrence was not just any lawyer. He was the man who had guided Daniel through his first deals, had stood at his wedding as a best man, and had been present at the signing of every major contract in the years that followed. When he arrived, there was none of the usual lightness on his face. Daniel locked the door behind him. "I need you to see something," he said. He turned the laptop toward Lawrence and pressed play. At first, Lawrence watched silently. The audio revealed Isabel giving orders, punishing Maya for minor mistakes. Then the video showed something worse. Maya, small and shaking, cleaning the floor while Isabel stood over her. Another clip showed the basement door closing with a metallic echo. Lawrence raised a hand and said, "Stop there for a second." Daniel did not stop. He wanted him to see it all. Minutes later, the lawyer leaned back, his expression grim. "This isn't just cruelty," Lawrence said. "This is abuse, Daniel, systematic and deliberate. You have enough here to open a criminal case." Daniel's voice was calm when he said, "I want her to lose more than her freedom. I want her to lose everything she values. The house, the status, the admiration, everything." Lawrence nodded slowly, thinking. "Do you have financial records?" Daniel clicked a folder. "I've been monitoring everything for years, but I never looked closely until now. There's something strange about several accounts she opened in Maya's name." Lawrence scrolled through the spreadsheets. After several minutes, he said, "This needs an investigator. If what I think is here is real, Isabel has been committing fraud." Within 48 hours, the investigator returned with confirmation. Isabel had been siphoning funds from trust accounts set aside for Maya, creating fake accounts in the child's name, and using them to cover her luxury expenses. When Lawrence walked back into the office, his voice was sharp. She's been committing federal crimes for 3 years. Tax fraud, identity fraud, misappropriation of funds. Using a minor's name makes it worse. Daniel said, "And the authorities?" "They'll be very interested," Lawrence replied. "Daniel, this goes beyond a divorce. Once this starts, there's no going back." Daniel looked at him with a steady gaze. "She made the choice the day she put a dog's bowl in front of Maya. Now I'll finish what she started." Lawrence leaned forward. "We need to time this carefully. You want her exposed publicly?" "I want her to wake up thinking her world is perfect," Daniel said, "and end the day realizing it was already over before breakfast." While they waited for the formalities to move forward, Daniel stayed close to home. Each evening, he sat at the table, listening to Maya answer his quiet questions with short, careful sentences. Each morning, he made sure she ate before school. On the Friday before the plan was set into motion, he cancelled a meeting worth millions and drove her to school himself. Isabel tried to stop him in the hallway. "I have a routine with her," she said, her voice light, though a thread of tension ran underneath. Daniel placed a hand on Maya's small shoulder and said, "I want more time with my daughter, that's all." As they drove through the city streets, Maya sat with her hands folded in her lap, barely moving. He said softly, "Maya, you know you can tell me anything, don't you?" She turned her head sharply, eyes wide with panic. "I'm a good girl, Daddy," she whispered. "Mommy Isabel says I'm good when I behave." Daniel's heart clenched, but his voice stayed calm. "You are a good girl," he said. The rest of the ride was silent. Later that afternoon, Lawrence called. "It's confirmed," he said. "Everything we need is ready. Federal authorities will execute the warrants on Thursday morning. We meet them there." Daniel looked out of his office window at the distant hills. "Thursday," he said. "That's the day she learns the truth." Thursday morning began in silence. Sunlight was just touching the tops of the tall trees outside when Isabel reached for her phone, still in bed, and froze. Her banking app showed blank screens. The main accounts that held her carefully built life were frozen. She tapped the screen again and again, whispering to herself, "This must be a mistake." The doorbell rang. It was not the tone of a casual visitor, but the sharp, persistent ring of authority. Still in her robe, Isabel descended the stairs, her bare feet against the cold marble. When she opened the front door, 3 federal agents stood there. "Mrs. Isabel Carter," one of them said, holding out an official document. "We have a warrant to search these premises. You are under investigation for tax fraud, financial misconduct, and suspected child abuse. Please come with us for questioning." She blinked rapidly, trying to keep control. "There must be some misunderstanding. My husband is Daniel Carter. This is our home. You can't just—" Another agent cut her short with a flat tone. "We can, and we are. Step aside." Her knees wavered as she stepped back. The sound of shoes on marble filled the house as the agents began to photograph every corner. Isabel's voice cracked as she said, "Wait, I need to call my husband. He'll explain." "You don't need to," another agent said. "He will be here soon." Not long after, the front door opened again. Daniel walked in with Lawrence beside him, and just behind them, a woman carrying a clipboard. Isabel took one step forward. "Daniel," she said, forcing a trembling smile, "please, can we talk privately? This is all a mistake." Daniel stopped at the threshold of the kitchen, the same kitchen where he had seen Maya on the floor weeks before. His voice was calm, steady. "No more private conversations." Lawrence placed a tablet on the counter and tapped the screen. "How about we talk about this?" he said. The first video began to play. It showed Isabel in the kitchen, her hand pointing at the bowl on the floor, while Maya crouched silent. On the screen, Isabel's voice said, "Finish that, you disgusting little liar. That's the dinner you get when you lie." Isabel took a step back, her face going pale. "You were spying on me," she said, her voice rising. "That's illegal." Daniel answered, "Installing security devices in my own home to protect a child is not illegal, especially when that child is being harmed." Another agent came into the kitchen carrying a box. "We found documentation of multiple bank accounts created in the minor's name," she said. 3 years of transactions linked to tax evasion. These will be used as evidence." Lawrence swiped to the next recording. Isabel's voice echoed again, laughing on a phone call. "He loves the idea of saving a black child, makes him feel noble. And while he's busy with that, I get help around the house." Her own words, now in front of strangers, hit her like a blow. She turned back to Daniel. "Please, let me explain. I only wanted us to live well. She has everything she needs. It wasn't like—" Daniel interrupted, his voice sharp for the first time. "Does she have the right to eat at the table like a human being? Does she have the right not to be locked in a basement because she's hungry?" Lawrence slid another document across the table. $240,000, he said. That was the amount diverted from accounts intended for Maya's care. Money that became cars, jewelry, and spa trips. Isabel's breathing quickened. "You can't do this to me," she said, her words tumbling out. "We have been married 15 years. You'll destroy everything over this." She stopped abruptly, the next word stuck in her throat. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low but clear. "Over this what, Isabel? Say it. Show them who you really are." Desperation overtook her. "Over a child that isn't even ours," she said, the words spilling out. "A stranger you brought into our house." The woman with the clipboard, a child protection officer, spoke firmly as she wrote. "This confirms motivation for abuse based on prejudice. This will be classified as a hate-driven case." Daniel looked at Isabel for the last time. "For 3 years, you showed us exactly who you are. The only difference now is that the rest of the world gets to see it too." One of the agents gestured to Isabel. "Mrs. Carter, come with us." She tried to walk, but her legs gave way and they had to guide her out. As the door closed behind her, the house felt strangely still, as if the structure itself had been waiting for her to leave. Maya stood at the top of the stairs, her small hand gripping the railing. Daniel walked over, knelt, and opened his arms. She hesitated only for a moment before running into them. "You're safe now," he said quietly, holding her close. The woman with the clipboard stepped forward. "Mr. Carter," she said, "from here we will ensure she receives full protection. You can begin new custody arrangements immediately." Daniel nodded. "She will never go through this again." Outside, the siren of a federal vehicle started, carrying Isabel away, her life unraveling street by street. The silence in the house after Isabel's arrest was unlike anything Daniel had ever known. No music playing from her phone, no footsteps echoing with impatience, just the sound of the morning light sliding across the floors. That afternoon, the social worker returned with documents for Daniel to sign. Maya sat at the table, small shoulders drawn close together, her hands resting on her lap. She kept her eyes on the wood grain as if afraid to make a mistake. Daniel signed everything and handed the papers back. When the social worker left, the house felt even quieter. He turned to Maya and said, "Do you want to go outside for a while, just you and me?" She glanced at him, unsure, then nodded. They walked together down the path that curved through the garden. The hedges were tall, and the sunlight fell warm on the ground. For a while they didn't speak. After a long pause, Daniel said, "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Her small voice answered, "Will she come back?" He shook his head. "No. Things are going to be different now. You're safe here." They stopped near a bench, and he sat down, waiting until she climbed up beside him. He said, "I'm sorry I didn't see sooner. I should have been here. I thought you were happy because that's what I wanted to believe." Her fingers twisted together in her lap. After a moment, she said quietly, "I tried to be good, so she wouldn't tell you to send me back." "You never had to earn your place here," Daniel said, his voice steady. "This is your home, and I am your father. That won't change." She looked up at him with a hesitance that seemed to come from years of caution. Her lips moved before her voice came out. "Can I call you Daddy for real? Even now?" Daniel's throat tightened, but he nodded. "Always. That's who I am to you." For the first time, she leaned against him without looking around to see if someone was watching. He put his arm around her, and they sat like that, the garden around them warm and quiet. In the days that followed, everything shifted. The locks were changed. Isabel's name disappeared from every account and every legal document. The mansion no longer felt like a place for performances. Each morning, Daniel cooked breakfast himself. At night, he read aloud to Maya in the living room, sometimes stopping when she fell asleep on the couch so he could carry her upstairs. There were still traces of fear in her. She would glance toward doors. Before walking into rooms, she would pause before answering a question. But each day, something in her posture softened. One evening, a week after the arrest, Daniel found her sitting on the floor of her room, surrounded by crayons and a large sheet of paper. She looked up when he knocked on the open door. "Can I see?" he asked as he walked in. She nodded. On the paper, she had drawn a house. In front of it were two figures, one tall, one small, both holding hands. "That's you and me," she said almost shyly. Daniel crouched beside her. "It's perfect," he said. "Just like us." For a moment, the weight of everything that had happened pressed against him, but it no longer felt like a crushing burden. It was something that had been endured, and now there was only the future to build. Downstairs, the phone buzzed with messages from lawyers and investigators. There would be court dates, hearings, the long process of justice, but those things no longer frightened him. Looking at the drawing again, he said quietly, "From now on, this house is ours. No secrets, no fear. Only us." Maya smiled at him, a small, cautious smile that carried more strength than anything he had ever seen. And in that moment, Daniel understood that what had been broken could be rebuilt, as long as he never looked away again.